What's up, everybody? Troy Cartwright here. Welcome back to another episode of 10 Year Town. Keep submitting those questions for the Q&A episode. I just saw a couple come through. They're really great questions, and I'm looking forward to talking those out. Also, keep those ratings and reviews coming. We see them all, and we appreciate it. Thanks. Today's guest is the legendary Chris McHugh, A-list studio drummer, has played on literally thousands of records, hundreds of hit songs. He's here today to talk about his journey, including working with Dan Huff, his time with Keith Urban on the road and in the studio, talks about a few bumps along the way, and of course, some deeper questions about life and everything in between. So without further ado, here he is, Chris McHugh. Well, you know, I normally start this thing off. I just say, how long have you been in town?
Okay, I moved to Nashville in 1985.
Wow.
Getting close to my fourth decade.
Wow.
Or having been here for 4 decades, yeah.
Did you come from, you're from New Jersey?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I moved here from a little town called Oak Lynn, New Jersey, which is a borough of Camden in Camden County.
Okay.
Which is just literally right across the river from Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up? Like, were you like very into, obviously you were, you know, you didn't just wake up one day and you were already very good at drums. So.
Ooh, I mean,
or maybe that is how it happened.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think you're kind of born with a certain level of ability.
Yeah.
And, or at least you're born with something that says, I know what this is supposed to sound like, and I'm just trying to get it there.
Yeah, you're chiseling the David from the marble block, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And my older brother, Danny, who's 5 years older than me, he took an interest in drums when he got into, you know, right at the beginning of middle school.
Okay.
And I think I was 6 or 7 seeing him do that, and I would pick up his sticks. And at that point, you know, he was just playing on boxes or on the sofa.
Right.
Had his little practice pad and, you know, early preliminary like rudiment books and stuff.
Right.
And then eventually he bought a little, very like, you know, inexpensive drum set. And I would get home from school about 45 minutes before he did. So I would rush home and play.
Gotcha.
Before he got home. And that's kind of how I started.
Yeah.
And for the long, you know, at that age, before actually playing with other kids or in like school band, because we had like, trying to think what they called it, maybe like a dance band or something where you could play a set of drums with the regular configuration, you know, of horns and clarinets and all of that. You know, at the spring concert, we'd do 3 songs where you're actually playing a drum set instead of just standing there.
Yeah, the toms are just tuned in a way that it makes no sense.
Oh, yeah, no. And I mean, and you're, you know, at that age, you're just, the beauty of it is all of the things that you don't know don't really matter at that point.
Yeah.
And by the time I got into high school, he was playing in like garage bands and stuff. My older brother, Larry, who's 14 years older than me, took me into a studio for his own music.
Okay.
And, you know, the brother Dan that I had talked about a minute ago, he and I both played on, I don't know, my brother recorded like a half a dozen songs or something. And I think I played on maybe 1 or 2.
Okay.
But I was, I don't know, 13 or something in the studio. That was it. That was like, that's the thing.
You were like, hooked?
Oh man, just hearing it come back. Going, oh man.
Trying to erase the click, you know?
yeah. Well, man, at that point, you know, that was kind of the first time that I had, I mean, I knew I was going to have to play to a click and all of that, but that's the first time like really doing it kind of under the microscope. And, you know, I mean, you could hear it. What was nice about that, and it was all analog. And so, you know, it's all auditory, everything that's going on. You're not looking at any screens or anything. So
I see.
Even though you're trying to bury the click, if you will, or to play that, for those who don't know, what that means is you're playing so correctly on with the click track you can't hear it. You know, that's the goal of that. But the nice thing is that it wasn't a screen. Is like you can't see it, you can only hear it.
Oh, interesting.
And because it's not as, even when you are quote unquote burying the click, auditory wise.
Yeah.
If you zero that in on a screen, you're going to see some discrepancy.
Sure. Nobody's perfect.
Nobody is perfect, and thank goodness for it. And,
yeah.
So, that cutting my teeth, if you will, on analog. Always grateful for that. I'm not like hung up on formats and all of that. I don't.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like whether you're recording digitally or analog.
Oh, okay. You're not a.
No. I'm whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever we're doing doesn't
Agnostic.
matter to me. Yeah. So, but I think the training ground of learning how to make records on tape.
Yeah.
I'm really thankful for that because you have to play a performance from start to end.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And depending upon the engineer you're working with, even punching in is difficult unless they're really good. And some of those guys were incredible. They could like, you could fix a kick drum.
Oh, they were that good.
They could punch in and out that quick and knew the machines because the space between the erase and the record head and all of that. But so you really had to play, really well.
It's like a whole trade that's
like a blacksmith. It's no longer needed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not
Somebody
true though,
knows.
because there's a lot of guys that still, you've got people like Jack White and I don't necessarily know what format he's always on, but I know that he works in analog quite a bit.
Yeah.
And there are people who are really stubborn about that format and make, records on analog, and they don't want a bunch of editing and
all that stuff.
Yeah, it's all about the performance.
So you hear this, like you hear yourself playing for the first time. You're like 13 and you caught the bug.
Yes.
So how did that kind of get you from whatever, let's call it, that's kind of the starting gun. And then what happened after that, and how did you end up in Nashville?
Like at a church that I was going to, I had met a couple, Jim and Kim Thomas, and I met them and I joined their band. And this was at around, I think I was around 18 or something like that. And this was still in the Philly area there. And we went into the studio.
Yeah.
And so again, I was just like, this is really the thing that I want to do.
And how many, so you're 18 at that point, like how many times had you been in the studio, like between 13 and...
Oh, probably,
you know what I mean?
I don't know, half a dozen,
okay.
something
So
like that.
It was still like, it was a special occasion.
Oh,
sure.
yeah. And I mean, because you have to remember the cost at that time, a tape machine was like, $50,000 or something, and a recording console, like so, and you had to go to a studio. Like people didn't have studios in their houses,
Sure.
or like on a laptop.
Yeah,
and so it was few and far between, of even getting the opportunity to do it. Again, that just was, it was sort of a feeling. I mean, I like the idea of like being in a band, but the idea of being a session musician was far bigger. Like I thought, in the sense of like with Jeff Porcaro, who's playing with Toto, seeing a guy like that who's in a band and then also doing 1 million records, it's like, yeah, that's the thing right there.
That was the dream.
Oh yeah. And so it kind of flashed forward to moving to Nashville. I had auditioned for a group called Whiteheart, which is a Christian band. And so this is this must have been late 1984. And I was 20 at that time.
Okay.
So heard back from them, I think in and around Christmas time or something, to come to Nashville to audition in person. I sent a cassette in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how did you?
Of some of these things that we did in the studio.
Oh wow.
You know, through the years, and by that point, I think I had, I don't know, at least half a dozen good examples of songs that I felt good about sharing.
Yeah.
And then at one point, I went into the studio myself, paid for by myself, and you know, played along to click to different, played different grooves along to the click.
Gotcha.
And then I even had an early like Yamaha drum machine at that point too, that I had, you know, constructed some beats on that and played along with it to show that I could play, you know, tightly with a composed rhythm like that, you know, on a machine. And so that's what I sent to Whiteheart. And Billy Smiley and Mark Gershmal, who are the leaders of the band, were like, hey, this sounds great. And so this is all being done by like regular mail and phone calls. You know what I mean? That's what's so silly about this kind of thing is it's not
I don't know why it's so funny to me.
No, it's incredible anything ever happened, you know?
Well, but like it was kind of, I think about it all the time. It's like, why do we have I mean, I know why we have cell phones, but like, do we need them? Like it was kind of okay.
Well, it was. I mean, things got done. It took a long time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, there's much more flexibility to what can happen now at any given moment.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's good and bad, like anything else. But, you know, so, I mean, to put yourself there. So imagine in like November of '84, I'm sending in this cassette.
Yeah.
You know, it's regular U.S. mail. So let's say South Jersey area to Tennessee, I don't know, 4 days or something. And they're getting tapes from everybody, you know. It was a cattle call.
Okay, so somebody told you about it.
Yes, yeah. A friend of mine who, a guy named Art Noble, who played drums in a Christian band called Glad.
Okay.
They were in the D.C. area. And I met him, and he was a friend of mine. I met him at a gig, and he was really, really nice to me. And he was like, hey, you know, you should send a tape in to these guys. It could be something you might want to do. So I got the call back and auditioned in person over at, I guess it's still there, but there was a Christian label called Benson Records out in Metro Center, and they had a studio and everything there, a demo studio and a big studio. Oh, I think I even, flew in with my drums.
How?
Put them on an airplane.
Is that like just $4,000 or
no. At that point, you could fly like a 4-piece set of drums, and hardware for like a $50 tip. You just slip the guy a 50.
Man, seems like impossible now.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's so weird. Well, and two, man. So Nashville Airport at that point looked like a single story, like strip mall.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. Arrivals and departures were just on different sides.
Gotcha.
So imagine one level,
right?
One story.
Right.
And so, you know, at one road that went into it, and departures were the first set, like you drove in your car, was on the right. Okay, here's departures.
Right.
And arrivals is you just drive another 100 yards up, and there it is. And there's still some cool airports like that around the country, you know, that are, that's all it is, you know. It's not two separate buildings or anything like that. And flew in, auditioned in person, and it came down to me and another drummer, and they decided to have me do like a weekend's worth of shows.
Okay.
So rehearsals and shows. They were going to do the same thing with the other guy. I went first, and they were like, okay, we'd like to have you.
Yeah, they never called the other guy.
They never called the other guy, thankfully.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about that band is that it was, you know, the requirement was to be a member.
Okay.
And to help write and.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
it was a real, like.
It was a band.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were two primary writers. And so at the time when I was in the group, it was Mark Gershmal and Billy Smiley and Gordon Kennedy.
Yeah.
Famous songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, you know, I mean, he was a writer, but he didn't have, obviously, the cuts that he has.
Yeah, sure.
Gordon's a dear friend. All those guys are. Gary Lunn, who's a bass player, session player, was in the band. So just being in and around those guys, Mark and Billy produced records too. They start getting me in on sessions.
Gotcha.
So this is spring of '85. I'm about to turn 21. And I'm starting to play on records.
You're doing the thing.
I'm doing the thing.
It was the dream already.
It was the dream already. And one of the first records I did was a guy named Jeff Moore, and Dan Huff flew in from LA and played on it as well. That's the first time I met Dan.
Awesome.
You know, and he and I, we've been working together for almost 40 years.
For a long time.
So that's what's interesting about the whole thing.
Now, in 1985, was Dan Huff like, was he Dan Huff?
Yes.
Or he was already Dan Huff?
He had been in LA, I think maybe for 2 years, and his career had already blown up out there.
Yeah.
At this point, he's just playing on records as a session guitar player.
Gotcha.
But, you know, so this is kind of the golden era of like Lukather, Landau, and Huff, you know.
Yeah.
They're playing on everything.
Yeah.
Into anything that kind of has like an edge to it. You know, you still have a lot of guys like Dean Parks and all these. There's plenty of guitar players who are working as well. But sort of the hot shot dudes are those three. You know?
Yeah, yeah. When I was at Berkeley, like that was the kind of stuff that we'd really geek out about, you know?
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Sure.
How many, it's hard for me to conceptualize now, like how, in Nashville, like how many, you know, I kind of think of it now, there's like really 3 or 4 guys at each instrument that are like the guys. Like, was it similar back in the 80s, or was there more?
Here? No, there was less.
Okay.
Now remember, to do anything, you had to go into a studio.
Right. The expense was great.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were some quirky people who had home studios with tape machines and stuff.
Sure.
So this is we're still on tape.
Yeah.
You know, predominance of being on digital tape starts to really kind of blossom from '85 on. So that's basically, it's still tape, but you know, you're recording, you know, zeros and ones instead of an actual. So with that, you know, I mean, some guys could edit on it, and it was much easier to punch in and punch out. But it's not like Pro Tools, you know, where you can correct. You couldn't really correct anything.
Sure.
Once it was on there, it was on. And but yeah, so at that time, like when I moved here, the guys in terms of drums were Eddie Bayers and Larry London.
Okay.
You had guys like Kenny Buttrey, who were like the real old school guys who were still playing. And Roger Hawkins lived here, who moved here from Memphis, who, you know, played on Aretha and a bunch of Bob Seger stuff, and, you know, staple singers and Paul Simon and all that. So he lived here too. So there was like there was definitely an A level, like the first call guys. There was only like 5 of them.
Yeah.
Period. And then it kind of dropped off
So
from there. The guys who would work, but not like that. I think Paul Lime moved to Nashville in the late '80s.
Okay.
So obviously he came in and was in that A level too as well, you know. And then the same thing with bass and
right.
You know, it was, so at that point when I moved here, it was, you know, Glenn Worf and Michael Rhodes were the main 2 guys.
Gotcha.
You know, certainly on anything country.
Yeah.
You know, Bob Babbitt was here then, and Larry Paxton, and
so how do you sort of like move your way? You know, I'm like familiar with how it works, right? In songwriting, you just sort of do good stuff and people notice and you kind of move up as you go. Is it similar in
I mean, so
in the session world?
I never really, I'd only played on a few country dates in the 80s.
Okay.
But was playing on a lot of Christian records and then a lot of rock and pop stuff.
Gotcha.
So one of the, like, I would say one of the kind of breakout moments was I played on Amy Grant's Heart in Motion record, which had the song Baby Baby on, which is a drum machine. But I played on the next single, which is Every Heartbeat.
Yeah.
And those are live drums on there, and we cut that out in L.A. And what was I, like 24 or something like that, and that was it was a #1 single on one of the formats, but I think it was #2 on the big, the Hot 100 or whatever. It just could not break into #1, and I think it was because of Bryan Adams' Everything I Do.
Oh, interesting.
Nobody could move that thing out of the way. It just sat there for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Golly.
But the point is like that kind of like, that sort of put me on the map.
Yeah.
Started to get more work from that.
Yeah.
And
are you still touring a lot at this point, or?
Well, this was right when I had to make the decision to quit. So this is like 89, 90.
How did you
I had
balance those?
I just was like, I'm missing opportunities by being in the band. So
gotcha.
I quit.
Yeah.
And
was that hard was it a hard decision to make, or?
I mean, yes and no.
Yeah.
Because what I was missing, I just couldn't. I selfishly know it wasn't hard.
Yeah.
It was hard to disappoint the guys in the group.
There's like hard decisions because you don't want to let people down.
Yeah, and ultimately they were like, well, they kind of get it. Like, they're human beings as well. I still think it was disappointing for them, and but what is interesting is a few years after I left the group, they had me come back and play on a couple records.
That's how you know you're good.
Well, but also that those guys are nice enough to see, like, hey, this is still our friend, and we like what he does, and even though he put us through some hell there for a minute, we'll get him back in, because it's never fun to have to replace anybody in a band. And
no,
but so at the point that I quit the band, the lineup at that point was, the singer was Rick Florian, Tommy Sims was playing bass at that point, and Gordon Kennedy was still in the band. And so, Tommy and Gordon went on to write Change the World for Clapton, and they've written tons of songs for people, and they're both incredibly talented. And I mean, Tommy's just insane. Gordon's insane. They're both. So, but that was the core rhythm section, was us three. Wow. And I learned so much from those guys, Tommy went on to produce, like, right around that time that we both left. He left before I did, and I left shortly after him. Tommy was producing Michael Bolton. He had me come in and play on some of that.
Yeah.
And, so now we're in early 90s, and I toured. I went on the road with Amy to support that record.
Gotcha.
And that was an international tour.
Okay.
I mean, we went Bangkok, and we played in the Philippines and Australia and New Zealand and everywhere, Europe, and it was a full.
It was huge.
It was an 18-month world tour. So that was 90, 91, and maybe part of 92. And then I went back out on the road with her 94 and 95. And this whole time I'm playing on records. I'm doing sessions as well.
Yeah.
And
was some of that stuff like easier to commit to, just because it was more like, here's the tour, these are the dates, and I'm sure you were well taken care of.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And on that tour, so like the band was, the first time, Michael W. Smith, I think, was the musical to help put the band together.
Crazy.
And I had done some touring with him too.
You just keep reciting like all of the bands that like were on in the car from like when I was growing up.
Right.
So that's kind of wild to me.
So, but the band was me, a bass player from Detroit, a guy named Tyrone Hannon.
Okay.
And Jerry McPherson was on guitar. And Jerry and I had met in '86 working with an artist named Kim Hill. The point to all of this is, like, as I'm kind of moving along and working with these different artists, around other session players at the same time too.
Yeah.
And so when you're saying, how do you kind of like, how does a career sort of like snowball?
Yeah.
It's in all of that. You're working with players that are working on other records too. They recommend you to a producer. Hey, you ought to get so-and-so.
Yeah.
I'm playing in Amy's band with them. And it helps that when you're playing on stuff that's hitting.
Sure.
It's easier for people to hear what you can do, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, get this guy, he played on blah, blah, blah. And people are hearing it all the time on the radio. So that's like a songwriter, it's the same thing. You know? And, you know, in songwriting, there's nothing helps more than a hit, you know.
No, I mean, it's everything.
It's everything. Like, every like obstacle seems to fall away for a minute.
Well, and you see it so often. It's like somebody we just had on, Brett Tyler. It's like Brett Tyler has always been one of the best songwriters that I know.
Right.
But once he had a hit, it was like everybody else knew it too.
Right.
But a lot, you know, if you're in it, you already knew it. And
well, you could be great, but not proven.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, the you know, the reality of this business is like you have to be a part of the bringing in of some numbers, you know.
Yeah.
And that's really the funny thing is like what does all of a sudden seem to qualify your ability is that you wrote a song or you played on a song that hit.
Sure.
And then you become a part of a sound, you know. And I would say that you know, mid 90s, I go back out with Amy again. Another one of the guitar players on that is a guy named Will Owsley. And I play on and help produce his record, which is just a self-titled record called Owsley.
Okay. That
a lot of people have reverence for, certainly with my playing on it as well. So that's like,
gotcha.
And it's kind of inside, you know. It's what musically it's called power pop, you know.
Okay.
And so that record came out in '99. That was another big, even though it wasn't like a huge seller or something.
Yeah.
The sound of the record, which it had been nominated for Best Engineered Non-Classical.
It was influential.
It was influential, yeah. And in '99 or '98, I had played on the Chris Gaines record.
Yeah.
And Don had produced that, and so like things are really shifting. So by the time we get into early 2000s, it's like the career's on fire at that point.
Yeah.
You know, that's
what did that feel like in the moment? Like, did you know?
Well, I mean, yeah, but you know, I mean, I'm also a kind of person where, you know, there's never enough, you know?
Yeah.
I always wanted to be, you know, more. So, but that's just kind of more how I'm wired. Like looking back, you know, I mean, I enjoyed it. I do wish I had enjoyed it more because
really
that kind of thing only, you know, I've had different levels of peaks and valleys and you know, doing it this long.
Yeah.
All kinds of things happen, but that rocket ship, if you will, was, and so I played on Keith Urban's first solo record in '99 or like 2000.
Okay.
That had a Love Thing on it. And But for the Grace of God.
Sure.
So that's really me starting to play on country records.
Okay.
Matt Rawlings hired me to play on that record. And when they called me, he said, hey man, I want to do a couple days of pre-production with this artist I'm working on, Keith Urban. We want to do a bunch of loops. And which seems like nothing now, but you have to remember in '99, wanting to do loops on a country record was pretty radical, you know? Yeah. So I had been working on a lot of records with a producer named Peter Collins, British producer, and I always programmed stuff. I had an MPC. I still have it. I mean, it's in a case somewhere. But,
sure.
So I would make loops on that, if even it was just percussion or whatever, but just stuff to play to, and often it was used on records.
Gotcha.
And so Matt calls and says, hey, for a couple of days I want to do pre-production on this guy Keith Urban. I thought it was like a soul record.
Okay.
Because his name is Keith Urban.
Yeah, sure.
So, you know, I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know about the ranch or any, you know, I didn't know about Keith. I didn't know really about country music at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, growing up, I heard all the biggies, you know.
Sure, but it just wasn't your world at the time.
It wasn't my world. I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And so I go there, and that's the first time I ever meet Keith. And we're at Matt's studio. So we do pre-production, and then we track, I think, well, we tracked maybe for 4 days or 5 days over at Javelina, which is where Dave Cobb is now.
Okay.
The RCA studio.
Mm-hmm.
Blacktop was on that record, where the Blacktop
Yeah.
ends, and well, you know the record, and
Yeah.
Grace of God was on there. So there wound up being like 3 singles,
Sure.
and I think 2 of which, I don't know if Blacktop may have not. I think it was top 10. I don't know if it went to number 1, but For the Grace of God did go to number 1.
Yeah.
So here it is. It's year 2000, and at the same time, I'm playing on Sean Mullins' stuff,
Okay.
Shimmer, and working a lot. Craig Young played bass on all of that stuff for Peter Collins.
Okay.
That's how long we've been working together too.
Yeah.
Around about that time, I had seen Dan Huff, and I had kept in contact and stuff through the years, and we worked together a little bit. But now he's producing, and we run into each other like at a grocery store. And he starts like hiring me on everything at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, if I look at any of those things that keep track of your credits,
Sure.
Muso or Jaxta,
Yeah.
he's
That's when it started.
60% of
Yeah.
of everything I've worked on,
Yeah.
And we wound up doing all of the Keith records together. I played on all of Keith's records. Fuse, I think, was the last one. I only played on a few songs on that, but that's when Keith started changing producers. And
Gotcha. Pretty crazy run there.
oh yeah,
I mean, like that was sort of like, that was when I first discovered country music. Was through that, and it was on MTV and stuff. It was.
Yeah.
It was.
I played on Rascal Flatts, Life is a Highway, and
Yeah. Wow.
What Hurts the Most, and Stand, and
Crazy.
played on the Me and My Gang. I played on like 3 or 4 of their records, maybe more than that, albums.
Yeah.
And was playing on all the Carrie Underwood stuff at the time too, the Keith stuff. So in 2004, Keith and we were just kind of joking and like, hey man, well maybe you come out on the road with me. So that's when I started touring with Keith. It was
Gotcha.
in 2004.
Okay.
And I did that from 2004 to 2014.
Wow.
Did that for 10 years.
Yeah. What level was he at in 2004?
All right. Well, this band that he had put together, which was me and Mark Hill
Okay.
and Chris Rodriguez. So we there were keys and a utility player. Chad Jeffers is the utility player.
Gotcha.
And the keyboard player, I can see him. Steve King is the keyboard player.
There it is.
The idea of putting that band together was to have a band that would help him become, a headline arena act.
Gotcha.
There were 60 dates booked. By the end of that, he had accomplished. So this was this was the tour to support Be Here.
Gotcha.
So that had Days Go By and,
Yeah.
and Better Half and Better Life.
Yeah.
And then had already had the success of Golden Road.
Mm-hmm.
And
Man.
so it all was kind of blooming at the same time.
Yeah.
And by 2005, it was international.
Yeah.
Obviously Australia, but we were playing in Europe and kind of all over.
Yeah. And at this point, were you still trying to balance that sort of like doing sessions and tour? Because
Yeah.
it was probably country touring is a little bit more
Oh yeah,
relentless, right?
It's relentless.
Yeah.
He would change the years. Like he'd do a real heavy year and then a lighter year.
Gotcha.
And the lighter years are what they call more of like fairs and festival dates.
Right.
Where you're not necessarily out on tour. You're kind of doing weekend runs constantly, but not throughout the entire year.
Right.
It's sort of concentrated through summer.
Yeah.
And private shows and stuff like that.
Sure.
And on those years, that would typically be the year that he would record too, because
Okay.
he had less demands in terms of touring. But I was his musical director and band leader, so anything obviously anything that had to do with the studio recording, that was, Dan Huff and Keith doing that as production duty. But anything that had to do with the live stuff, I was producing all of that. So
Gotcha.
anytime we did TV shows, and which at that point, we were doing a million of them.
Yeah.
Any of the morning shows, and you have limited time there, so you have to do edits on arrangements, and
I see.
you have to submit that, and it has to be approved, and
Yeah. Just like a full-time.
oh, it was
More than full-time, I'm
yeah,
sure.
it was a lot, and I learned a ton,
Yeah.
and so I did that for 10 years. I mean, I was 40. I did that from 40 to 50.
Yeah.
I'm gonna lose my headphones on that because, it was. I mean, it was great, but it's not like I was, like a young man or something.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And so after 10 years, it was time to do something else.
Yeah.
And he needed to do something else too.
Yeah.
It was time for him to make a change. And
Sure.
yeah, it's often people are like, well, what happened? I'm like,
Yeah.
it's like, well, we just sort of came to the end of the line.
Things just sort of tend to reach their.
Yeah, it just was like, all right, that was great.
Yeah.
We
did it.
We did it. We did it, and it's time to do something else.
Yeah.
And
were you were still like doing a lot of studio stuff at the time?
Yeah, so like, the beginning, like the last show I ever did with Keith was New Year's Day, 2015.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that was the end.
Did y'all like know?
Yeah. We had already met before then, and kind of realized that we were in the same place.
Yeah.
Like in 2015, I did a bunch of traveling. I have a son that lives in Shanghai in China.
Yeah.
Went to see him, took a good couple long vacations. And the biggest thing, though, that we haven't brought up is in 2014, I had a heart attack. So,
Gotcha.
and still went out and did 60 shows after I had the heart attack.
That's crazy.
Which you should do. Like you shouldn't sit there. You got to get back in shape and
Yeah.
everything.
How long? Like how long? I guess you like the doctor says like
2 weeks, you're back at it.
Really?
Oh yeah, no, they don't want you.
They don't want you sitting around.
No. Wow. That's the worst thing for it.
Okay.
But it does cause you to kind of reevaluate how you're spending your time, and
Sure.
and I've got 4 kids, and I was like, yeah, okay, I think it's time to kind of just get back to doing session stuff, or to see what else is out there. I was always doing sessions the whole time I was with Keith, so that wasn't anything, different to go. Okay, not like I had to invent a session career.
Sure.
It had already was existing.
Yeah.
And I just was like, okay, I'm going to focus on that.
Got to lean into it a little more.
Yeah. And around 2017, I had a second heart attack. And there were, I mean, just quite frankly, I'm a recovered alcoholic addict. And so at the time of the second heart attack, I wasn't in recovery.
Gotcha.
And so I really had to make some changes.
I see. It was like
well, I was dying.
Yeah, you're just like if I want to still be here.
I can't live this way anymore. And I'd gone through a divorce, and so at that time it was really important to just focus on newfound sobriety. Yeah. I mean, in November of this year, I'll have 6 years, God willing. But point to all of that is it you have your career, and then life presents itself. Yeah. The beauty of music is that it is always there to serve. So what's funny is like one of the first records I did after, becoming sober and like coming back from rehab was working on the Nashville TV soundtrack.
Oh, interesting.
And I had done a bit of that before I'd gone into rehab, but now a producer, keyboard player by the name of Tim Lauer had taken over the MD spot for Nashville TV show. Yeah. And that was one of the first calls I got. I think I was actually in I had gone out of town to go to rehab, and I was at the airport flying home, and he had reached out and said, "Hey, can you work in the next couple of days?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I did that, and then I was always doing session work. I just what I really did is I reeled back my profile, like in terms of like any kind of social media or anything like that. I really kind of like was almost hibernating in a sense, because of the focus of what I was doing, and I didn't want distractions in it. For any of those that are out there that don't know, when you're in an early part of sobriety, you're kind of insane because you're learning to live without this thing that was sort of your armor.
Yeah.
And so, you're kind of fragile.
I see.
And so I think in early 2018, we started working on that Cry Pretty Carrie Underwood record.
Yeah.
That was one of the first ones of being in sobriety. And then, so, after a few years of that kind of focused, just, being in new sobriety and all of that.
Yeah.
As far as career, kind of returned to sort of like normal.
Gotcha. So you almost had to slow it down to sort of just find your sea legs again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even creatively too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. Is it like scary to play for the first time? Like obviously, like getting all this work, I don't imagine you were probably like getting hammered for sessions or whatever. But it's like it's there.
Yeah,
it's part of the process.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And what you find when you're not under the influence of something.
Yeah.
You're a lot more. For me, I had a lot more anxiety than I had imagined.
Yeah.
But
sure.
But the thing masks it. So it took a while to redevelop a pure confidence. Which sounds a little ridiculous.
No,
having done everything that I had done at that point.
Yeah,
but it's this relationship with yourself, and your mind will tell you terrible things about yourself, which aren't true. And it messes with your confidence, of course.
And like what kind of, because I think it's something a lot of people will be curious about. I think obviously, it seems like, musicians are more prone to substance abuse just for whatever reason, probably because of anxiety and the highs and the lows and blah, blah, blah. But what kind of things do you helped the anxiety? Does it just get better over time, or are you into like? Fortunately,
in recovery and in the 12-step group that I'm a part of, there's tools that are taught, There's no way to like to fully live a life where you have no fear.
Sure.
And so it's, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And, so my practice in that is a lot of meditation and prayer, so when anxiety comes along, and it does,
Yeah.
I just pause for a moment and try to just get sort of centered and connected and grounded. And realize, that the things that your mind is telling you, and especially, for me, this is my personal belief that, as an addict alcoholic, the thinking is you remove the substances, but the thinking is still there. So it's the maintenance of the thinking.
I see.
And if the thinking is prone to take you back to a place that wants to destroy you, then I know this probably sounds to the average person, it's insane. It really is. But it's I would say the most, the basic way to describe it is that if you get a negative thought, it's like, you don't know how to do this. You're no good at this. If you're susceptible to believe that in spite of all of these achievements,
right,
you have to combat that with something, and you have to realize, well, this is just, I've been hearing that ever since I was a kid, that's
so,
just a.
But you're telling me that even you, with all that you've accomplished, you still get imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It is insane. Well,
who would you be imposing as?
No. So that's what's great about this, and even talking about it, is that it's all insane.
Yeah.
Like, but you can see even athletes that at the highest level have to see sports psychologists and to try to combat negative thinking. And because the purpose of it is like, and you probably know this too, when you're songwriting, doing a vocal or whatever, when you're in the flow of creativity and it's almost like your brain is off.
It is. It's a flow state.
That is when all of the good things happen.
Yeah.
And that's difficult to do if you have this voice that tells you, oh, dude, this ain't no hit.
Yeah.
You know, like you should give up on this
You're
one.
dragging on this one.
Yeah. What was that, Phil? You know, I mean, just stuff like that. You know, so what you get, like when you say, okay, imposter syndrome, like for me, there's a certain level of muscle memory that just exists.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's still not even in where the good stuff is. The good stuff is in that flow state. And if you're playing and creating cautiously, now again, we have rules, right? We have rules of what we can, the parameters of what we can do inside of a song. But the beautiful moments are when we are pushing those boundaries as much as we can.
Yeah.
And if you're in negative self-talk, that's not going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
So that's really the thing. And it never occurred to me until I got sober of how prone I was to that kind of thinking, you know? And so what that would look like would be like fear, anxiety, self-doubt.
And I imagine it's just, you're used to dealing with that in a very certain way. So, so when you cannot
so like with
pull that escape hatch anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I was earlier describing it, it's like a suit of armor that you put on. So it's nice to be, you know, okay, if I'm known as, you know, I have a name in terms of drumming, it's great. But like any room that I'm coming into, and I'm being pretty like vulnerable about this, but you have to be that person. They've hired you to play on it, and again, this was more so in early sobriety, trying to figure all this out. Yeah. Because, you know, I would come into with a particular sort of set of ego and vibe, and, you know, and I've got this lore of authority of who I am. And, you know, it was fueled by a substance. Yeah. And so you take that away and all of a sudden you realize, oh, well, I'm not as cocky as I thought I was.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And, so you relearn how to live, and how to be yourself, and that's really the purpose of even recovery itself. Is how do I become comfortable in my own skin now that I've removed this substance or this drink? Yeah, and to learn to be you, and as you know, and anyone creative, when you are your most authentic self, again, that's when all the great stuff comes out.
Oh, it's the hardest. It's hard to find sometimes.
It is.
You know, but at the same time, sometimes you don't even think about it and it's there. And, you know, we all have periods, or at least I know I do, where it's like the muse has like forsaken me for a few weeks at a time. Sometimes it feels like, and I'm just like, man, am I ever going to get it?
Yeah.
You know, which makes me appreciate the times where, you know, I do just show up and it's there, or, you know, and
well, and that's why you show up, because you don't know.
That's what you learn, is that when you show up, the only way for it to be possible is you have to keep showing up.
Yes.
And your baseline is a lot higher than you think it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you start to get over, when you're in that really authentic self place, the highs and lows are much easier to deal with, you know?
Yeah.
You're looking at things right-sized, as opposed to, it is great to have a song that does really well, or to play on music that, you know, is hitting and getting a lot of streams and all of that. But ultimately, if you're not satisfied with the art that you're creating, and in my case, you know, as a sideman, which is the equivalent of being like a plumber in some senses, because you're just coming in to fix a musical leak. And if you're able to do that with some identity, then that's a really beautiful thing. But at the end of the day, I'm there to play drums, and it's the service part of it, It's like here's the song, here's what we want, and you have a little give and take in there. It's like, well, okay, well, I could add this, I could do this. What do you think of this kind of sound?
Yeah.
But really, my point to the plumber comment is like the glamour of it makes it a lot smaller when you realize you're just sort of somebody like behind a front desk of like, hey, we need more towels. Great, here's more towels.
Yeah.
Like and
I need a fill.
I need a fill. Need a good one. What's funny is throughout any given year, if you look at all the work, I think in any musician, you look at it as a pie.
Yeah.
The really what I would call chances where you can really be creative and really add your own thing, that's like a 5% slice of the pie.
Yeah.
And that's no knock against any of the other music.
Right.
It's just often it's not needed.
Sure.
And you try to add those things, it can be anything from nobody sounds like I sound, so there's that. I mean, there's some people out there who kind of copy it, but
right.
So even if I'm playing the most basic thing, I hope people can tell that it's me.
Right.
And I think after all these years, they have a general sense of that.
Absolutely.
And so
yeah.
That's why it doesn't have to be too grandiose. It doesn't have to be, a lot of songs don't need that,
Yeah.
They just need to have a groove laid down, and the sonics of it need to be appealing to the song.
Sure.
And that's really my favorite thing, is to try to figure out what lights up the vocal the most, because to me, hit records are generally the sound of the vocal and the sound of the snare drum, and really not a whole lot else matters.
Gotcha.
I know that's a horrible generalization, especially for you as a songwriter, but if those things don't relate properly,
yeah,
I don't think it can hit.
I mean, I think we're all here trying to figure out what's the space between it being a hit and it being a great song.
Yeah.
Is, it's microscopic, but I don't know what.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Seems like sometimes like somebody like you or like Dan Huff like might understand it intrinsically or something. But,
yeah, I mean, certainly in Dan's case, I think there's enough of a track record to show that. And for me, in terms of just playing drums on songs that hit, I think I have a good feel for that, a good sense of what that should sound like.
Yeah.
That's not to say that I don't make mistakes and miss sometimes, and even Dan misses, everybody can miss. You're human,
Sure.
And for me, it's something I'm really grateful for, having to gotten to do this for so long.
Yeah.
You whittle that down. You start to realize, okay, well, these really are the ingredients that can make up.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And that's not that you can try something else, or you can push the boundary a bit. And there's always, that's what's great about new music too, is that people they break the rules that you thought were unbreakable. And then you hear that and you're like, oh man, well, I have more room to try whatever.
Yeah.
And that's how we learn, as music creators. Because if you're, again, like I said earlier, there are rules to the 3-minute and 30-second country song.
3:10 now.
3:10, right? It changes. And so what can you do in it? And so you take what you know, you throw that up against the wall and see if it sticks,
Yeah.
For a good portion of it, something that had worked before, a variation on that will work again. But what's nice, and this is the best part about collaborating, is you try that and then someone says, no, that's not really hitting me. We need to augment what you're playing somehow, or to change it. And that's when you get into things like, well, hey, on the first course, let's do a drop. We're not going to have anything. There'll be no drums in it.
Yeah.
That becomes a thing for a while. you know, and then it's,
I see.
you know what I mean?
Cycles
It
around.
cycles
yeah.
around. It's like, okay, no drums in from the beginning.
Right.
Now we're back to drums in from the beginning, you know, linear drumming where you're just playing through the whole song.
Yeah.
And kind of building as you go.
It's like a lot of options, but it's like probably in the end, it's like 6.
Well,
sort of.
yeah, I think so. I think so. And not
background.
to make that sound like, you know, that's not a bad thing.
No, it's
Because you still have to time which one of the 6 things.
I think I like parameters.
Yeah.
I find it's easier to be creative within a parameter.
Yeah.
Like that's the boundaries are there to give you something to play with.
Yeah.
You know, or that's your canvas is just it's this big. It's
Yeah.
3 minutes and 30 seconds long. So what's the, you know, either some days it's what's the dopest thing you can make, or some days it's the what do I think would sell them.
Right.
You know?
Well, and that's what's funny is I don't, you know, I'm not sure that people understand that that's exactly the way you think when you're, because at the end of the day, I mean, these are widgets we're making too.
Yeah.
Like, so it has your heart and soul in it, but you're wise enough to know that it has to be palatable.
Mm-hmm.
People have to get what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And the masses, they regulate that.
Sure.
You know, there's a reason why there's not a ton of 7-minute hit songs. Trying to hold someone's attention that long is
Yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah.
And the craftsman part of being a songwriter that's going to put a fully succinct idea that has a repetitive lyric that pulls a listener in and wants them to hear those lines again, that's a real art form.
Sure.
You know, the parameter creates art in itself.
Yeah.
Because we are human. Now, you know, I know we're gonna see some AI versions of that, and
Oh, man.
and those will be challenging. I'm sure there'll be some that'll be like, wow,
Yeah.
good job, computer. You know,
Well, it may just be copying you in the end.
well, it will.
Yeah.
No, that's the amazing thing about it is, as the database continues to grow, it's pulling from. I mean, I don't know how the thing works, but I would think it's starting with, you know, the biggest hits of all time.
Yeah. Well, I've heard different things, which is probably a whole other podcast, you know, of like of the sort, you know, it's a fight that's looming.
Yeah.
What's the source material for this stuff, and how are we?
yeah.
What's the attribution
You know,
going
there's
to be?
some of your copyrights on there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes out to all creators.
Yeah.
Is that it's being you know, culminated from work that everyone has done, which is pretty dastardly. You know, that's a kind of an evil move.
It's like you trained your replacement, you know.
Totally.
But-
we thank you, Napster. Just
Yeah.
kidding. No, I mean, but look, it's like, what are you going to do? I mean, what are you going to do about AI?
Nothing.
I mean, it's like,
It's
you know,
coming, man.
Yeah, it's here. I mean, at a certain point, you'll pay a ticket to go see a concert put on by something that's not even really there, that's beamed in.
Yeah.
There won't even be a human on there.
Which I always say, okay, so like a movie, like is that we're just so
kind of like a movie, but in 3D and
yeah, so
somehow interactive somehow.
yeah, but people are gonna want to go. I think if you
Oh.
as long as you can make somebody,
I agree.
you know,
I agree.
I'll be all right.
So like when and we can even, you know, I think we're getting close.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, we gotta
Well, we
wrap
can
this
even
up,
wrap
but-
up with this story. But when I was a kid, I think I was about 14 or so. I would go visit my brother, my oldest brother Larry, who lived in a town called Ardmore, which is west of Philly, and he worked at a music store there called Music City.
Okay.
In Philly, outside of Philly. And the guy who was one of the owners of the store was a drummer who played in the original NBC orchestra band. So you have to remember that there was a time when radio broadcasts were live
Right.
and there was a band playing.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is way pre-TV.
Sure.
So it would be, this is the NBC hour, you know,
these are the guys.
Show. And so he was that drummer. Those guys said things like, the musician, the first time he ever slit his own throat is when he allowed himself to be recorded. So, and now we're talking about AI.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like,
it's always the end.
it's always the end. I mean,
Yeah.
because his point of view was, at that point, to hear a band, you had to hire a band.
You had to go. And they were playing off sheet music. And
Yeah. And now we're going to get back to it.
well,
That's what AI is doing.
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we there's an artist, Stephen Wilson Jr. He has a song called "The End," and it says, "We've been talking about the end ever since the beginning."
Yes.
So
I agree.
you know,
well done,
here we are.
Steven. Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for being
You're
here.
welcome.
I really
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it,
me.
and I appreciate you.
Yeah. You too, Troy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the pod.
All right.
All right. See you later. Thanks everybody for listening. Keep rating, keep reviewing, keep subscribing. We love you. Talk to you soon. Bye.